Hi, I'm Kelly Chase and this is History Detective, and today I want to talk about the portrait artist of Marie Antoinette, Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun. If you have ever seen a painting of Marie Antoinette, it is very likely it was painted by Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun, who painted over 30 portraits of Marie Antoinette. As a royalist, when many supporters of the royal family were being sent to the guillotine, she decided to escape Paris for about 12 years during the French Revolution, lending her talents to Italy, Austria, and Russia. Marie Antoinette was the wife of Louis XVI and was the last queen of France before the French Revolution. She was born in Austria and married Louis at 14, although they did not have any children until she was 23. You may have heard the famous phrase that was attributed to her, that she didn't actually say about cake, or seen the pictures of her incredible hairstyles and glorious gowns. Prior to the revolution, France was in a financial crisis due to loads of foreign debt and a succession of poor harvests, and so the Austrian queen and her lavish spending were a perfect scapegoat for the country's money problems. One of the things that she did spend her money on was getting portraits done. This was usually the domain of a male artist, but Marie Antoinette took a shine to a young female artist who was born in the same year as her, Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun. Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun rose from poverty to mix in aristocratic and artistic circles, only to lose many of her clients and acquaintances to the relentless blade of the guillotine during the French Revolution. Elisabeth was born to a father who was an artist, not a particularly successful one, but one who nurtured his daughter's talent from a very young age. He died when Elisabeth was only 12, and in her grief, she quit art. But it was an artist friend of her father who encouraged her to start painting again. She began painting portraits when she was a teenager as a way of supporting her widowed mother and younger brother. Her mother ended up getting remarried, and her stepfather would take her earnings. One of the methods she used to hone her craft was to copy famous artworks. This is one of the reasons she liked her future husband. He was an art dealer and he had a collection of beautiful paintings that Elisabeth could use to sharpen her painting skills. She was in two minds about marrying this chap. She didn't need the financial support as she was earning an excellent salary. She describes him as being well built with a pleasant face and as having a mixture of gentleness and liveliness. However, a friend warned her it would be better for you to tie a stone around your neck and jump into the river than to marry Le Brun. She did eventually agree to marry him as a way of escaping from her foul-tempered stepfather. But like her stepfather, she gave over all of her earnings to her husband, and he had a furious passion for gambling, which eroded away at her fortune. Elisabeth painted portraits not only of the bourgeois Parisians and nobility, she also did a number of self-portraits. One of these was the self-portrait in a straw hat. She was inspired by the artist Rubens, who had a painting called Straw Hat. She credits this work to helping her gain entry into the Royal Academy of Painting. Of course, there was some opposition to her entry. Over the 150-year period of its existence, the Royal Academy only admitted 4 women. Elisabeth loved to party, and she especially loved being the hostess. In her memoirs, she bragged that her parties were so popular that sometimes there weren't enough chairs and people had to sit on the floor. She would invite famous operatic composers who would perform snippets of their operas, violinists, singers, and Elisabeth even played the guitar and sang. There was court-style dancing, plays were performed, they had games of charades and played dress-ups. There were also exclusive after-parties where she curated a list of intellectually superior guests who would be treated to a small meal, and they would sit around discussing politics, literature and the latest gossip. Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun is most famous for her portraits of Marie Antoinette. In fact, her first portrait was dubbed as scandalous, and she ended up painting over it to be more acceptable to society's standards. Although Marie was clothed top to toe in the portrait, she was wearing a dress of muslin and a straw hat. She was not even wearing a corset. In the second, more socially acceptable version, Antoinette was wearing a corset and her hair was appropriately coiffed and topped with a fancy headpiece. Over her time working as a portrait artist for the palace, she painted more than 30 portraits of the Queen. She became very fond of Marie Antoinette and sung her praises as being a kind and generous woman who instilled good manners and good values in her children. Another of her famous portraits, which many dubbed as propaganda, was that of the Queen with her children. The painting depicted an empty cradle, as Marie's youngest baby had just died. This was meant to endear the public to the Queen, showing her as a loving mother who had experienced tragedy. The Queen was apparently unable to even look at the painting without reliving the grief of a lost child and ordered it removed from the halls of Versailles. This ended up preserving the painting from the violence of the March on Versailles, where peasants stormed the palace and broke into the Queen's bedroom, plunging knives into her bed. Don't worry, she wasn't in the bed at the time. However, she did later lose her head to the guillotine, which distressed our artist Elisabeth, who had left the country by that stage. Elisabeth was distraught at the violent and chaotic events of the French Revolution. She lost many of her previous clients and friends to the relentless blade of the guillotine. She was so afraid that she decided to leave Paris. In her memoir, she tells of how she would hear shooting as she was painting portraits and how one time revolutionaries threw sulphur into her cellar. She also relates a story of how one of her acquaintances was forced to drink a glass of blood that was flowing in the stream in front of the prison he was being held. A former deputy of the National Convention describes the horrors he saw. Neither age nor sex were spared. Women, children, and old men were ruthlessly hacked to pieces in the name of humanity. As Elisabeth was escaping the country, she was almost stopped by a drunken, angry mob, and her friend advised her to take a public coach rather than her personal carriage, so she was able to leave. Elisabeth did eventually come back to Paris after the Revolution during Napoleon's reign, and during her lifetime, she is said to have produced more than 800 works of art. She lived to the ripe old age of 86. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and if you would like to hear an original song on this topic, there is a link to Portrait of a Queen up there. And in the description below, you'll find a link to my website where you'll find a list of references and links to teaching resources. This is Kelly Chase on The Case. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this video is being recorded today. I pay my respects to the elders and knowledge holders, past, present, and emerging.